Okay, so this is gonna be the start of video 3. We are laying out the dimensions that we see on here. So what I wanna do here is I'm gonna start with these tapers. They come an inch over from the side of our 7-inch board. So I've just taken a combination square and I've set it to 1 inch. I'm just gonna put it up on the edge of my board here and using a sharp pencil, I'm gonna mark at the top there. And then I'll come over here and do the same thing on the other side. Put a mark right there. And that is gonna be my 2 marks. Next up, I can use a straight edge. If you take the combination squares apart, please put them back together so we don't lose those pieces. And I will draw my line there. And just connecting the dots here. I'm drawing my line there. So this is the part that I'm going to get rid of. Now I'll go ahead and do the circle. I want that circle to be centered on the middle of my board. So I know my board is 7 inches wide, which means the center point is gonna be 3.5 inches from either edge. So I will set my square to 3.5. And I'm gonna measure along the bottom here. Just make sure I'm actually putting that square up against the board. So I'll measure up against the bottom there and put a little mark there. And I'm gonna check it on this side to make sure it's the same and it's right on, so that's good. So you probably can't see it, but there's a tiny little mark there. Now I'm gonna use a compass. Some of these compasses have a scale on them, so if I were to set this to 2 inches, it would be a 2-inch radius. I can also, on this compass, I can just go ahead and use the ruler to help me out. So I can put one point right at the end, and I can adjust the other point to just be right at 2 inches long. So that looks pretty good. This is just decorative, so it doesn't need to be perfect. And I will put my compass point right in the end of the board there. And I'm just gonna make that arc. All right, so there's my arc. You're gonna see for me, I've decided to cut out that knot, so that's a good thing I got rid of that. We're gonna get rid of this piece here, that's good. And then our last thing we've got to do is cutting out this dado, or mortise, I guess would probably be a better term here. It's 1.5 inches down, 1/2 inch wide, and it's centered on this board. So while I still have my combination square set to 3.5, I'm gonna go ahead and mark the midpoint there. And then what I'm gonna try to do here is I've got to come like 1/2 inch total. So it's 1/4 inch on each side. I'm just gonna use my ruler here, put it right on that line and measure 1/4 inch, and then 1/4 inch on the other side. So I've got my 1/2 inch width. Now to get my 1.5 inch depth, I will just set my combination square to 1.5 inches. And I'm gonna draw straight down those lines. So I'm gonna put my pencil there, slide it up, draw straight down, put my pencil there, slide it up, draw straight down, and then I can just trace along the bottom of my ruler to get the actual overall height. So you can see right there's what I've got. Now, I've only showed you one here. We've got a couple of options. If we were doing this, if I was doing this at home, what I would probably do is I would actually tape these together. I would make sure they're really well lined up. I would tape them together really, really well using some double stick tape. And I would cut all of this stuff at the exact same time so that I didn't have to worry about whether it's lined up or not. We can also just measure out, mark them both separately, and then cut them separately. They might be a little bit different if we do that, but that's okay. So the next step you're gonna see is going over to the bandsaw, and we're gonna cut these, at least these 3 out. We can absolutely cut out our mortise on the bandsaw. It's not gonna give us as straight a cuts as if we cut it out on the table saw. But if you're not feeling super comfortable with the table saw and the dado blade sticking out 1.5 inches like that, that is a safer or an easier choice if you would like to do that. Okay, so we're over here at the bandsaw. We're gonna go ahead and cut out our legs. We've got our lines here and we're ready to go. A couple of things on the bandsaw that we wanna make sure about here. This bandsaw, you can see up here, says tension blade before sawing. On the back of the bandsaw, you can just see here there's a handle. If the handle is down, the blade is going to be loose and it will not work. Put that handle all the way up, and then we've got a bandsaw that's going to work. The second thing we want to be sure of is that our blade guard is pretty close to our workpiece. So here you can see there's quite a bit of room. We were cutting 2x4s on this last. So I'm just going to loosen up the knob in the back and drop this down. It doesn't need to be super close. Some people will say like 1/8 of an inch off the board. I'm going to say more like 1/2 is probably pretty reasonable, so you've actually got some room. And then tighten up that back nut or knob back there. And then on our bandsaw, we got on, off, and then an emergency stop. The biggest thing I want you to think about with a bandsaw is we don't want to be sticking our fingers too close to that. It looks like it's not moving very fast, but if your finger catches that blade, it's going to pull it down. It won't be good. So little offcuts, make sure we're not reaching to grab them, turn off the saw, then grab them. Let's go ahead and start. When I'm cutting, I'm going to make sure I'm staying on the outside of my lines because I can always sand back to the line. If I cut past my line, I can't do anything about that. I could absolutely use the bandsaw to cut this piece out. I would need to do a little bit of relief cutting here. So if I can get this to focus, I'd cut down this side, I'd cut down this side, and then I'd kind of come in and cut a little angle, like a sweep this way. And then I'd come back and cut a little sweep that way and then try to work that material out of the middle. It would take some time, but I could absolutely do that with the bandsaw. It would work just fine. Stay inside your lines and make sure that we leave some room that we can sand or file back to those lines if we're trying to do that. We'll also show you another way that you can do that in just a second. So our next step here is going to be to sand these down to the final line. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my two pieces, I'm going to kind of line them up with each other, and I'm going to use this whole sander all as one piece. You can absolutely do it separately. These are just decorative, and just like everything else down here, right below here, there's an on and off switch. Hit the on, it'll start spinning. Hit the off, it'll stop. And one thing to note here, this drum, this big drum, is a 4-inch diameter. This is exactly the circle you want. So if you can push that circle in, you know you've got perfectly the right size. Now we're over here at our edge sander, our big belt sander. We're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna line these up and just kind of hold them together. I'm gonna turn on the saw, or not the saw, the sander. It's gonna wobble a little bit, that's intentional. And I'm just gonna press this up against and try to sand right down to my line. So now hopefully I've got two pieces that are smooth on all their edges, nice and rounded off, ready to go to cut that groove in there. This video is going to cover cutting out the, I guess you call it a mortise, like an open-ended mortise on our leg assembly here, our leg piece. The first way we're going to do this is with the bandsaw. And so you can see I've got my my mortise laid out there. I'm going to cut this out on the bandsaw using the one with the little blade here. I'm going to show you how to start. The big thing is when we go to cut this bottom, we can't just turn that 90 degrees. So I'm going to come all the way down on both sides. Then I'm going to kind of come at an angle and try to go into this corner. And then I'll come back and try to nibble that inside out. I'll try to remember to stop and zoom in on that part for you. Here we go. So the most important thing on all this is that I've left my lines. I've stayed inside my lines. I'm going to sand back to those lines or use a file, use a chisel or something. Don't cut the line off or you're going to be too big. Now I'm going to cut out this big chunk in the middle. So I'm going to come down to the bottom, towards the bottom. Now I'm going to start working at the curve here. Nice and slow. If the bandsaw starts making loud noises, something's gone wrong. But you can turn pretty sharp with this small blade if you go slow. There you go. I've got that little piece cut off. Don't stick your fingers in there. And now I'm just going to come back the other way. And I want to come back and just clean up this edge. There we go. So, doing it this way is not perfect. We're definitely going to need to use our chisel, and we'll have to make sure that we end up with a tight fit when we actually cut the tenon, but that's a good way to do it. Okay, so I'm not all the way to the shot here, but that's okay. The next way to do this is at the dado stack on the table saw. And to do this, since we're going to need to be able to support our board, I've clamped what's called an auxiliary fence or a sacrificial fence onto my crosscut sled. That's going to let me slide this whole thing over and position my board right where I want it, and then still keep my hands relatively far away. So if you're still feeling like this is a little bit too close, which is completely understandable, you can get this thing positioned where you want it. So I can say, okay, right there, I'm positioned perfectly. And now I'm going to clamp my workpiece, my leg, directly to my sacrificial fence. And now, since nothing's moving, I'm going to be able to do this the whole way down. We're going to do it in little pieces, so I'm going to start with the blade pretty low. I'm going to raise it up as I go. I'll try to cut some of this out because it's going to take a little bit, but I'll leave enough and you kind of get the idea. Here we go. So we're going to raise our blade up just a little bit at a time after every pass. Here we go. All the way through and straight back. Now I'm going to raise my blade just a little bit, maybe like one turn on the crank. I'm just going to do a little bit at a time here. Maybe like a quarter turn. Okay, not quite there yet. Another quarter turn. That looks really good. So, as you can see, that ends up with a lot of that blade sticking out. That's why we clamped our workpiece onto the sacrificial fence. My hands can stay well away. And I'm going to make sure right away I'm just going to put this thing down because we don't need that much blade sticking out on the dado stack. But when I unclamp my piece now, you're going to see I've got a really nice mortise cut in there. Unlike the one on the bandsaw where I'm going to have to go back and clean that up with a chisel, this one looks really, really nice. If you've got a few people that are doing this all at once, you can leave this sacrificial fence attached and just all go and do it at the same time. That'll give you your best result on the back because you're going to have that perfect finish because you can't get chip out of the back. But there's my two pieces, and we're ready to make our stretcher.